In this video we will be discussing 48 Laws of Power, a book by Robert Greene. I actually believe that this book might be dangerous in some people's hands, so here's the presentation. So I have finally finished reading the book 48 Laws of Power. Is the book worth reading, and should you read it? This is the question you want to answer to. So, the short answer to this question is no and yes. Vague, I know. This book is very complex. I believe that in the wrong hands, just like I said before, it can be dangerous. In the right hands, it can actually be utilized for the world's greater good. So I will explain why in a short time. So, why? It is dangerous to the untrained and unaware, fragile-minded person. So someone who is unstable and fragile, someone whose mind is not fully developed, maybe in a teenager's hands, maybe someone who is going through a tough period, maybe someone who had a tough upbringing, someone with a lot of anger in their system would actually be very dangerous with this book in their hands. Most people are fragile-minded and lack self-awareness, so a lot of people are damaged just from childhood, just from upbringing. We are all damaged, and we sometimes have a lot of anger in us, and this book will teach us how to utilize that anger to cause a lot of harm, and I'll explain why again. So, easily taken out of context without much knowledge of the world. So you can easily take the book out of context, you can easily use it towards the bad side of the yin-yang, and overall it's very easy to misunderstand the principles set out in this book. Its powerful leaders led the world into turmoil for their advantage with those principles. So the principles that were used in the book were damaging to our world as we have it now. Obviously the world is built up by those leaders, but again, in this video you will learn that this book had a lot of toxicity in it. The book goes into detail on how to manipulate the world to your advantage. This is basically the book's main goal. It teaches you how to manipulate the world to your advantage. How to manipulate people, how to manipulate situations, and how to make everything good for your own benefit. It's not for the greater good of the world. It doesn't focus on that. This book is definitely not spiritual, so if you have any spiritual inclinations, I do not recommend reading this book. Now, I am quite set out and I have good principles of my own, and it's very hard to change my mind on something that I've already know. So this book has not caused me to go insane. So again, I'll explain so much later on in the video because I can't spoil it for you now. Most people will take these things and spread maliciousness. So a lot of people will look at these principles, learn how to manipulate people, learn how to manipulate things to their advantage, and cause harm. So it's pretty simple. You probably wonder why. What's in this book that's so damaging? Again, I'll tell you soon. To become aware of... So this is the only reason to read the book. This is the only reason why you should read the book. I have multiple reasons here, but still. To become aware of how the world was built in the most evil and selfish way possible. All the leaders that were described in the book were absolutely just... they were the devil. They were only worried about their own lives. They were very narcissistic. They were pretty much what you consider the devil. They did not have any consideration for people around them. They wanted whatever is good for their own sake. So we will become very aware of how those tactics and principles were used by those leaders. And this is an interesting thing to learn for some people in a book. Understand that 99% of people in power are in power for their own benefit and not for the greater good of the world. So that's what you understand by reading this book. And you don't have to read it just to understand that. You can only watch my video and kind of trust me on it. If you think that you are most gullible. So, yeah. If you think that you're gullible, then you should read this book. to see the reality of the world instead of living in an ignorance is bliss type of world. A lot of people go by the world and just say, oh, ignorance is bliss, I don't want to know anything. This book will tell you the reality of the world, how it is. So this will ruin your ignorance is bliss type of thinking. So you will actually understand how malicious this world is. And if you don't want to know the reality, then don't read this book. Simple as. There are brilliant historical references and stories that I personally enjoyed. The most enjoyable part of the book, it's all the way through the book. The examples of historical events are just incredible. Very well described. I do not know how accurate they all are, but they are very entertaining to listen to. They are very entertaining just to imagine in your own head happening in real time in like 1920 or even 1500s, like the 15th century. You don't hear many stories from the 15th century or the 12th century. Sometimes as far back as like the 3rd century, stories as far back. But I don't know how accurate those stories are, but they're very entertaining. They are a prime example of what not to do in the world if you want to remain a spiritual kind of person. To make sure that history is not repeated, world moving towards a downward trajectory because of self-serving negligence. So you can read this book for good intent, to make sure that history is not repeated and somehow try and stop, however this world is moving into a certain trajectory, into a certain path. You can try and stop that. So this book will teach you all the evil that there is, and you can kind of convert that into good by being like, okay, I recognize evil, I recognize what's going on, I will try and stop that because I know the tricks, so I'll try and do good. This is the only reason to read that book. If you are, again, not a stable-minded person, and if you have a lot of anger built up in you, this book will be quite negative to your life. Be aware of these things while reading. If you decide to read this book, be aware of these things. Do not follow the steps of the book. Simply understand how a mind of a highly manipulative person works. This is what you should consider. Don't follow the steps of the book. This will only cause a negative effect. You want to understand how a person's mind works that is highly manipulative, that is narcissistic, only self-serving, then you should read this book if you are interested in how their mind works, if your mind doesn't work in that way. But if your mind works in a negative way, just like those leaders did, then you will cause harm. That's my point of view. Understand that if you use these principles you learn, you will contribute to the evil side of the good versus evil world balance. So there's an evil and good kind of balance in this world. That's what I believe in personally. Good versus evil, constantly fighting. It's like the devil versus the God. If you understand these principles, and if you manipulate the principles to your own advantage that you learn in this book, you will contribute to the evil side of the world balance. Now, I've said this 10 times already. This is the main thing that I got from this book. Apart from all the historical references that I've learned, this is like the main picture. That's like my conclusion, if that makes sense. If you are inclined to be evil, this book will magnify that immensely. Again, repeating myself so much, but this is literally what this book is about. If you are inclined to do good, this book will notify you of the evil around you. Verdict: if you are insane, you will become a psychopath. If you are a genuine good human being, you will become aware of insanity and psychopaths around you. So again, you understand how a psychopath's brain works, like Ivan the Terrible, or like Mussolini and Hitler and all of those leaders that we had that were really negative towards the whole world balance. You will understand how their brain worked, why they wanted to be in power, how they got into power, how they manipulated people around them to remain in power. You will learn how a psychopath's brain works. You will also learn about all the other rulers of the world in from the 4th and 5th century. It's quite entertaining, but It's very disturbing. Benefits of reading 48 Laws of Power. You learn that arguing never wins. So these are things that you learn from the book just based on the principles. So you learn that arguing never wins. When you argue with people, you can't win an argument. If you even win the argument with that person, they will end up resenting you, and in a way you didn't win that argument because that person is now repulsed by you. So no one likes a competition like that. If you argue with someone and you prove, oh, I'm right, and you're wrong, no one likes a person like that. You become aware of who to avoid in life. So you become aware of the people that are narcissistic, self-serving, and you try and avoid them as much as possible in your life. Also, in business dealings, you will learn who to trust and who not to trust. You will also become aware of scammers around you. So this book goes into detail of how con artists and scammers are operating. So you will learn how to spot them. You become careful with dangerous people, and again, this falls into the category of scammers and con artists. You learn how to deal with dangerous people and people in power. Because you know their tactics, because you know how their brain operates, you can use their tricks against them, or just by being aware of their tricks and their manipulation, you can save yourself from being a scapegoat in their lives. You get to know how a powerful person's mind works. That's a tongue twister. Try to say that 10 times. Powerful person's mind. Yeah. So you learn how their brain works, you learn how their mind works, and it becomes quite interesting because their brain works in a different way to most of our brains. You will be more aware when you are being manipulated. You understand how manipulation works. You learn how to have clear boundaries, and that's very well said in Law 16, because some people are easily manipulated and they let themselves be manipulated constantly. So you learn how to have those boundaries so you do not become a person who is always manipulated. To fully understand the world and become less ignorant, this is the book to read. It will open your mind, yet it will disturb you. So, to fully understand the world and how it operates, read this book. Because I'm sure you do not know the maliciousness that was going on throughout the whole time this universe was, recognized. All the way from 500 BC all the way to now. So much maliciousness has been going on, so much bad, so much evil. All the negative words you can use right there, you can use them. It will disturb you how many people want to have power in their lives, and how many people, this is their number one goal, to be powerful, no matter who it will harm, what it will do to other people. They don't care about their families. There was even one story of a woman in power killing her own baby just to remain in power. So you can just get the extent of how terrible it can be. What did I enjoy from reading it? I thoroughly enjoyed the storytelling aspect of this book. It goes way back in history to tell stories of how leaders of thousands of years ago gained and sustained power, as well as how they lost power through blunders. So in this book, overall, this book is very well structured. So you learn the actual law of power, the principle, then you learn how it was used in the world, how this power, how this law was used in leaders, in history, and just in politics. You learn how this law was used, basically. And then it will give you all the ways you can use it. It will give you the reversal of that law. So it will be always tell the truth. Law number 10, always tell the truth, or something like that. And then it will be okay, so reversal. Never tell the truth. So it'll tell you what comes from the reverse of that law. So whatever they tell you what law it is, the reverse of that. So it can be quite interesting knowing the reverse effects of a law of power. And also then they tell you transgressions. So this is like a blunder. So if that law is not being followed, what can happen? Things like that. So that's quite interesting. The structure of this book is consistent and well written. It is predictable yet engaging. So the book is predictable because it has a similar format. Like every single law has the same format, and you get used to it. It becomes fun, and it's very well written. Robert Greene is a great author, and I believe that the book was very well written. I do not know again how accurate those stories are. I didn't fact check any of those stories, so I would not know. But it's very, very engaging and very enjoyable. But again, in the wrong hands, it can be devastating. I became aware of the harsh reality we live in. I was already aware of how toxic the world is, but I wasn't aware of how, like, to what extent this toxicity spreads. I learned that the methods used 2,000 years ago in power are still used today. The same principles apply without much innovation. So that's what I learned. That the principles used like thousands of years ago, they haven't changed. Nothing in this world changes in those terms. Everything remains the same. There's not much innovation. There's not much change to those principles. Whatever tactics they used before, they still use today in politics, but they have a better way of covering it up as like friendliness or something for your greater good. Back then, it was more like sketchy. You didn't have the media, you didn't have like the television spread, everyone watching television, everyone on social media. You didn't have that before, so you had to go on trust. Now, people are pretty much brainwashed, I think even more than they were before, so yeah. The same principles are still used, so this can be quite interesting for you to read, and maybe you will become a little bit less trustworthy after reading this book. Well, actually not maybe, definitely. Conclusion. The book is not for the light-minded or the light-hearted because it can cause maliciousness, and if you are not stable-minded, you can actually use it to the world's negative. Yin-yang again, it's like the negative and the positive. In the wrong hands, it's highly dangerous. In the right hands, it enhances your ability to recognize evil and manipulative behavior. The book opens your eyes to the evil around you that has been used for thousands of years. It is, however, a really well-written book with fascinating historical events described in detail that go back many years. So read it at your own risk and don't contribute to the evil side of the world. The end.